have disaggregated your data for your yellow and red kids, and we have taken a look at their reading levels, areas of deficit with skills, other information that we think is important in terms of what's missing and we need to find more information out, but kind of some of the themes that we can see now. And so on your screen, you have the data that we just finished inputting. On my screen, I have the literacy data grouping sheet, and we're going to develop some groups for your kids. So looking at your screen, what do you think the first grouping would be? What skill would you be focusing on?
So a skill that almost all students on this list need to focus on would be the vocabulary section of literacy development.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could definitely do fluency,
Okay.
word recognition,
I would love to type that for you. However, it wants to give me blue type. There we go. Fluency.
word recognition, and then we're getting down to more individual focus.
But three great areas to start, right?
Perfect.
Okay. So as you're thinking about grouping kids, there's some things that you kind of want to think about, right? So when we think about, you have two students on your list that are First Nations Métis Inuit, First Nations gentlemen. And certainly it's interesting to me that Matthew, you've noticed already as his teacher that he's an auditory learner. That is part of their culture, that they come from an oral culture where storytelling and sharing learning is through story, not through reading, right? Not through text. So that's something to keep in mind for those students, right? The other thing that I'm wondering about is you don't have any ESL students on this list, but if you had an ESL student, what would you consider with that student?
So English as a second language learners would definitely need a different approach to how they learn and what they're learning and the pace that you're giving instruction out.
Mm-hmm.
So then I would definitely want to learn more about them if we can know more about them, either previous teachers that have taught them before, to get to know their learning styles, and maybe it'll help you out in your instruction.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I'm thinking about on this list is it would be handy if I knew there was an IPP available, if there is an IPP in place, or which accommodations these students may have, because that would also help my teaching from the beginning of the semester instead of getting to know them.
That is a great idea, and we will add that into the data sheet. I think that's an excellent idea. So if you're going to put, like you look at your kids, um, with the exception of two of them, they have more than one area of lagging skill. How do you decide where to start?
So with these students, just from looking at this data, if we started with vocabulary as an area of focus and they are on similar reading levels, then that would be a good place to start your grouping.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would like to know more about these students, their strengths of learning, and whether or not these guys get along really well, to make the learning environment a better place.
So we're going to assume that they all like each other and that they will work well together for today's little episode. But I think you said something that's really important for us to kind of spend a moment on is around reading level. Although we aren't focusing on reading level in terms of intervention, we're looking at skills for intervention. Reading level matters because when we're working on those skills, they need to have the right level text at their fingertips. So as a person planning for intervention, that's an important piece of it. What level text do these kids need? You could still have 5 of these kids in 5 different reading levels, but all needing vocabulary intervention, skill intervention, and you just need to have different levels of text in front of them, but still teaching the same skill, right? So who are you going to put in your vocabulary?
So we have Josh.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to get out of my highlighter. Josh.
Lily.
Oops. Lily.
Brittany. Carson. Mandy. and Marshall.
Marshall. Who does that leave you with?
That leaves me with Jasmine,
Okay.
Matthew, because we don't have the data on
Yeah,
him
we
that
don't
want
know enough
more
about him, right?
And then we have David over here. He does need vocabulary, but again, at such a low reading level, it might not be a good match with this level of reading.
Exactly. So in terms of the other two, we're gonna leave David out of this particular grouping, these groupings, just because we have some significant deficits there,
Right.
both in reading level and skill. But also keeping in mind that sometimes red students fit really nicely with yellow students. They have the same lagging skill. Their reading level might be lower, not that much lower maybe, but we could certainly put them together. So where would you put? We've missed out like Jasmine, like you said, and Marshall, right? So Marshall, you can't really program for. You need to get some more information on him, right? But what would you do with Mandy then?
So
Would you
with
work on,
Mandy,
or with Jasmine?
or Jasmine, yeah, Jasmine, same reading level, but different skills to focus on. So then maybe you could work individually with that student to try and develop skill-based learning to try and bring this up to grade level.
And I would say, knowing Jasmine, I do know that student. She's a super hard worker. I think getting a little bit more information on her might lead you to a different grouping as well, right? So I'm just gonna put those two students over here, so that we know that we have to do a little bit more digging on them. And then we have David, right? That we're going to decide what we do with. So the next thing that we will talk about when we come together is, now that we know the skill that we need to focus on and we know which students are going where, we need to think about, okay, how do we put this plan into place? We need to think about our resources, the amount of time that students get intervention for. Will it look different for David than it will look for the other students? How often will that happen? How big are the blocks? Who's going to deliver the intervention? How often are we going to assess to make sure that kids are either responding and we can move them into their next area of need, or if they're not responding, how will we respond to that? And then, of course, what are our resources? What are we going to use? You've mentioned a couple already. We've got our reading framework. We've got our literate discussion sheets. We have our ifs and thens when we're getting stuck and knowing what to do. And then we also need to think about tracking. How are we going to track their progress? And how do we share that with their classroom teachers and everybody else in the school and parents that need to know that? And then how do we push some of these supports back into the classroom so they're using the skills they're being taught and they're practicing them in the context that it matters the most in?
Right.
Okay, so we'll do that when we come back together.
Perfect. Thank you.